increasing her in weakness upon weakness, and his weaning is in 2 years. Be grateful to me and to your parents. To me is the final destination.
This Wednesday, join us on Radio Islam International for a special episode honoring the unsung heroines, the mothers of the pious. In this unique radio show, we'll explore the powerful influence of mothers who raised individuals of great faith, wisdom, and integrity. Hear inspiring stories of sacrifice, devotion, and the deep love that shaped spiritual leaders and change makers throughout history. Join us as we pay tribute to these remarkable women who, through their nurturing and guidance, played a pivotal role in the development of virtuous and pious individuals. Don't miss this chance to celebrate the quiet yet transformative power of motherhood, only on Radio Islam, where faith, love, and legacy meet.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Radio Islam International. We are busy with the episode of Love Your Kids. Love Your Kids, season 3, episode 2. And we were discussing in season 1 and 2 more about, the mothers of the pious, mothers of the Anbiya, alayhi salatu wassalam, how they nurtured and brought up the kids. And it was because of the mothers that those pious people ended up who they were. We did about Imam Bukhari rahmatullah alayhi, Imam Shafi rahmatullah alayhi, and many others. In season 3, we're exploring Love Your Kids, about in today's kids, how a person should bring up the kids, in what way, how we should be friends with our children. We want our children to speak to us, to tell us what they are feeling. We also want to know that, when a person brings up his kids, remember that it's not what you say, it's rather what you do. Children look at examples in their parents of what they're going to do. We have Marana Zir Ahmad Raghi. Marana, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you, Maulana?
Alhamdulillah, how's Marana doing?
Alhamdulillah, you had a good Eid, inshallah, and I see you were very busy. Before we know, Hajj is also already over. Last week you were on our live broadcast from Mina. MashaAllah. May Allah accept the Hajj of all those Hujjaj that went this year for Hajj, and may Allah make it a means of their salvation and make it a means of sending blessings, divine blessings on the entire Ummah, especially in these difficult times that the Ummah is going through, inshallah.
Inshallah, I mean, so the general practice is that parents issue unexplained orders and instructions to children with an arbitrary list of do's and don'ts. So when children ask for explanations, the routine answer is just do as you're told, or do what I'm telling you, or that's the way it is, do as I say, not as I do, or do not argue too much. Now, sometimes many of us have inquisitive children, and they may be reprimanded and accused of being disrespectful, impolite or disobedient. And to silence inquisitive children, parents may give inaccurate responses to questions instead of saying they do not know the answer. And we see that this happening very often.
Yes, Mu'ana. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Jazakallah for that question and the comment. It's a good introduction for today's program. As we know that last week we spoke about the various styles of parenting, and we had addressed the authoritative style and all the various other styles of parenting, dictatorial parenting, etc. And we also mentioned that many a times these approaches instill fear in children. So today we continue with this discussion, inshallah, and just to remind our listeners and our viewers that it's going to be a long session, inshallah, this season 3. And we are going to now be talking about how to build good relationships with our children. So whatever you have said, Marana, that, many a times there is this general practice among parents who issue unexplained orders, they issue unexplained instructions to children, and this aspect of just do it, don't ask too many questions. Sometimes when a child asks questions, we regard this as disrespectful. We even sometimes regard this as disobedient. And many a times, or sometimes, some parents, they silence inquisitive children. And sometimes some parents, we're not talking of all, do give inaccurate responses to questions that sometimes certain children may ask. And sometimes it's also because the parents don't have the answers for some of the, probing questions that some children may ask. Now, when this happens, this is not to say that these parents do not care for their children. On the contrary, they love and they care greatly for their families. There's no parent that does not love their child. Nevertheless, by trying to be strict and sometimes trying to be in control, they are in effect becoming domineering parents. And domineering is not the same as training. We need to draw this distinction. Many parents want to maintain control of the home, and in the effort to maintain that control, they become domineering. And domineering is not as tarbiyah, is not the right form of tarbiyah. Domineering approach is not an approach of training children, with which it is sometimes confused. This domineering practice does not help to raise children who are emotionally, psychologically, mentally sound. To raise strong children, parents need to engage children. We need to engage children in participative consultation. I know we're using these words, but I'm going to explain what I actually mean by this. That we need to engage our children and we need to engage them in a participative consultation process when we desire to bring about the right behavior, right environment, right training, right development in our homes. Now, let's take an example, Maulana, about the difference between a domineering authoritative and a participative consultative approach. Now, if you look at the Quran Kareem, subhanallah, we find that the best example that we can ever have is the example of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the manner that he interacted with children, in the manner he interacted with youth, in the manner he interacted generally with the people. And we had a lengthy discussion, Maulana, if you recall, the interactions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this approach of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, subhanallah, was an approach that was divinely inspired to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we find beautiful examples of that in the Quran Kareem. In fact, Allah Ta'ala tells Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَالَّذِينَ اسْتَجَابُوا لِرَبِّهِمْ وَأَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ, that establish prayer, conduct their affairs by mutual consultation. This is a very beautiful way of praising the approach that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam had adopted. In fact, a more beautiful way of understanding this is another ayah of the Quran Kareem, wherein Allah Ta'ala says, فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَزًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ فَاعْفُ عَنْهُمْ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لَهُمْ وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. Now, in this ayah, let's just translate the ayah, Maulana, for the benefit of our listeners, that Allah Ta'ala says that it is out of Allah's mercy that you, O Muhammad, O Nabi, have been lenient with them. So this is so beautiful. The eloquence of the Quran Kareem here is that whilst Allah Ta'ala is praising Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam for adopting the lenient approach, in that praise there is also a very subtle instruction that your approach should be one of leniency. Subhanallah. This is the eloquence of the Quran. And this applies to every parent-child relationship. So it is the mercy of Allah that you have been lenient with them. And then, subhanallah, Allah Ta'ala says, had you been cruel, had you been hard-hearted, وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَزًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ, they would have certainly abandoned you. In other words, when we have this domineering, harsh, rigid approach, even in our homes with our children, the result of that will be that our children would not want to be in our midst, in our company. Allah Ta'ala says, if you would have been hard, if you would have been harsh, the Sahaba would have abandoned you. So don't be harsh. And that approach is even for us with us as parents, with our children. And then Allah Ta'ala says, fa'fu anhum. Yes, your children will do wrong. In this case with Rasulullah, the Sahaba, perhaps they may do something that you may not approve of. But when that happens, fa'fu anhum, pardon them. Wastaghfir lahum, ask Allah for His forgiveness. Washawirhum fil amr, and then consult with them in conducting the matters that is before you. Now, subhanallah, Marana, if you allow me, I want to expand on this ayah from a very beautiful incident that we see from the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I want each one of us as parents, as teachers, just to reflect on what I'm saying. An example from the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam relating to this type of coaching, relating to this type of teaching, relating to this type of even parenting. We know about and we've heard it, but let's analyze this incident. And Maulana, please do come in whenever you want to, and even our listeners can come in whenever they wish to. The incident is of a young man who seeks permission from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to commit adultery. It's a famous incident, a famous story, and there is it's a famous story. It comes in a hadith that a young man comes to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he seeks permission from Rasulullah to commit adultery. Now, let's draw a parallel with this, with any incident that takes place in our home with our children, where our child wishes to do something which we may not approve of. And this happens in daily lives. Your child may come and wants to go somewhere, wants to sleep over, or wants to do something. Obviously, in today's time, you will hardly find a child that will be so bold that will want to seek your permission to go and commit zina. That won't happen, inshallah. But what's beautiful about this incident is you understanding firstly that this person that came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a young boy. It comes in the hadith, it was a young man. Now, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his latter life was in Medina. So this incident must have taken when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in his senior age, 50 plus, in the days of Medina, perhaps 55 or whatever. But imagine a young man has the ability to approach Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he has the freedom, and he has the Nabi of Allah, the government of the day, a man that is so occupied with the affairs of the Ummah. He's the Imam of the Masjid. He is the political leader of Medina. He is the Nabi of Allah. He has so many responsibilities. A man in that senior age, subhanallah, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Yet a young boy has the freedom and he is able to approach Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and not just approach to ask any question. In fact, he is coming to Rasulullah and is asking Rasulullah a question: may I have permission to commit adultery? Now, what happens in this incident? And this is the ayah, فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ. Had you been harsh, had you been hard, had you been rigid, people would not have been able to come and approach you. They would have abandoned you. They would not have come and sit with you. Now we find that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in reality puts into practice this beautiful ayah. And we all know that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asks him a few questions. The first question that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asks him is, the one that you wish, do you have a sister? Do you have a mother? The one that you wish to commit adultery, is she perhaps a sister of someone? How would you like if someone would commit adultery with your sister? Do you have a daughter? The one that you wish to commit adultery with, is it possible that she's someone's daughter? How would you approach it if someone commits adultery with your daughter? Do you have a mother? The one that you wish to commit adultery with, do you think that she is someone's mother? How would you like it if someone commits adultery with your mother? Now you are seeing here there is a consultative process that's taking place between Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and this young boy. It's not the approach, the domineering approach that no, stay away, haram, how dare you. We're understanding a very practical approach in the beautiful seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now in this consultative process, when the man understood the harm of his intention, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam makes dua for him. And that is the aspect of wastaghfir lahum, that Rasulullah makes dua for him. Rasulullah even makes istighfar for him. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam places his beautiful hand on the chest of this young boy and makes dua for chastity for him. And the young boy says, since that day, I never had a desire to commit adultery ever again. And I never found a teacher so compassionate that he did not abuse me, he did not speak to me harshly, he did not swear me, he did not hit me. Subhanallah. That is the context of the approach that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had. So here again, although the coercive approach, the domineering approach, may result in children giving apparent respect to their parents, unfortunately, this type of approach will be a hollow respect founded on fear rather than conviction and love. And I repeat this. If you look at the approach of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in this instance, it was not a coercive approach. It was a consultative approach. It was a consultative approach. And in this consultative approach, we find that he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, spoke to the person in such a way. The result was that he stayed away. In a similar fashion, if we have this consultative approach in our training, rearing our children, the tarbiyah of our children, instead of just giving instructions, we will find that it will have a conviction and love, fear, both learned and instinctual, will be discussed inshallah in detail later when we talk further about the harms of instilling this type of fear. This authoritarian approach is extended into the educational systems today, unfortunately. So as we said in the beginning, Maulana, we said that sometimes parents just say, do as I am telling you to do. And this authoritarian approach, unfortunately, is extended into many of our educational systems, in our schools, in our madrasas, in our makatibs, where children's respect for their teachers is not built on love, is not built on learning, but it's rather on fear of a teacher's displeasure or the fear of the teacher's punishment. The result is that children may not even do well academically in this type of rearing, this type of parenting. A coercive approach is enforced or reinforced by our educational system sometimes, in some cases, where most teaching is based on learning by memorization, swatting, rather than comprehension and participation. Now, let's take that same incident of the young boy. The approach that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was, he did not just instill in him that what you are doing is haram, but there was a comprehension and way that Rasulullah wanted him to understand the harm, and this approach was by a participation. There was questions, there was answers, there was shura, which resulted in a beautiful example. Now, let's not, I'm talking about memorization. I'm not talking about the memorization of the Quran. That approach is a total different approach. There's a scientific approach about memorizing Quran. We're talking about how we sometimes as parents just say things and we want our children to do as we say. Based on this system, on this coercive system, on this domineering system, on this authoritarian system, parents, even schools, even madrasas, have little to congratulate themselves for. All they have done is help contribute to a manufacturing of individuals whose behavior, whose social behavior, whose moral behavior is most of the time aligned with a dictatorial or an authoritarian institution. And they definitely, my beloved listeners, viewers on Ummahat, on our YouTube, and our listeners on Radio Islam, Radio Ansar, and whoever this message is going to go to, there exists a crisis in the Muslim mind and in the psychological and emotional upbringing of Muslim children. Firstly, the lack. We have a genuine lack of a coherent, methodological approach. In other words, I mean, we have a lack of an organized and structured style of teaching and parenting. We hardly plan, we hardly have an efficient way of carrying out this responsibility that we have. And then secondly, a fragmentation or a compartmentalization of our training and education. And these two factors, the fragmentation and the compartmentalization of our teaching approach in our educational institutions, and the authoritarian and dictatorial approach, are responsible for the weakness in our current day Muslim culture and Muslim thought. The lack of attention that is given to skilled parenting is equally responsible for the serious emotional, psychological deprivation, or rather weakness in many of our young children. And the current approach of many Muslims towards parenting, unfortunately, does not incorporate the Quranic vision of parenting. Now, you may ask, what's the Quranic vision of parenting? Besides what we have just given the example from the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the first mission and the first approach of parenting from the Quran is what I would call Imran, creating and developing a civilization. Now, each of us who are parents, each of us who are teachers, If we sit back and we just ask ourselves, let's take yesterday, how much of my interaction with my children yesterday was positively aimed at creating or developing a beautiful moral civilization. Go back from the beginning when your child got up to go to school or madrasa, or whatever else, or when the teacher saw the child entering the class. To what extent was my interaction with my child or my learner one of Imran? Imran means to develop, to build a civilization. The second motive of the Quranic way of parenting is what I would call itqan, perfection, working towards perfecting our communities. Again, we ask ourselves the question, in my interaction with my child yesterday or my learner yesterday, to what extent was I an example towards perfection, or instilled in my child such habits that were worthy of creating a perfect community? One is to build a community, was the first one. The second one, which I'm talking of, is perfecting that community. And the third one, which is equally important, is that among the Quranic approach of parenting is tafakkur, survey, research. So to what extent was my interaction with my children an interaction where I allowed them to explore, where I allowed them to ask questions, where I allowed them to do a survey of things that are happening around in the world, and together we acted in that? Rather, unfortunately, we find many of our approach, and I'm not generalizing, but unfortunately, some of our approaches are one of, just a slavish or imitative one. Do as I say, don't ask questions. This, I would call it is rather like a slavish, imitative one. Instead of being objective, instead of being methodological, instead of being encompassing what I've just said of Imran, creating that civilization, Itqan, working towards perfecting that in our communities. And the last one is together, let us have, positive academic discussions with our children regarding the affairs of the communities, regarding the laws of Allah, so that there is a good two-way communication between us. Another beautiful example one can think of, Morana. Morana, please do come in. When I'm talking so much, perhaps if whenever you want to come in, or whenever one of our listeners or anyone want to come in, and even correct me if I'm saying something that perhaps is not making sense.
So the number that the people can send a message 072-786-1548, 072-786-1548. Now we're quite deep into this, the Imran Itqan that Imran was explaining of a parent, how to engage ourselves with our kids.
Another beautiful example that just coming to my mind, the beautiful story of Yusuf alayhi salatu wassalam. It is so beautiful, subhanallah, that when Yusuf alayhi salatu wassalam sees the dream, who was the first person that he went to relate the dream? And Yusuf alayhi salatu wassalam was a young boy, 6, 7 years old, when he saw this dream, the dream of the sun and the moon and the stars prostrating. Who was the first person he went to? He went to his father. And when he discussed this with his father gave him consultative advice. Yeah, again, it is this aspect of, Imran, Itqan, Tafakkur, which is playing out, subhanallah. Another very, very major issue, Marana, in our approach in parenting. unfortunately, and this is perhaps, I don't know, maybe due to our culture, we are somehow sometimes extremely superstitious about things. You know, we are overwhelmed with the ideas of jinn, jadoo, sihr, magic. And as a result, we miss out on the fruits of a scientific, academic, matured mentality. And we miss out on the fruits of rational thinking, on the fruits of critical thinking, on the fruits of evidence based thinking, objective thinking. And when we see something wrong in our home, the first thing is, you know, someone did something. It's jadoo, it's magic, it's sihr, it's nazar. Yes, those things do exist, no doubt. And I think in the month of Ramadan, Maulana Suleiman Rawat had a beautiful program on this. Many years ago, we also did a program. I did a program on Radio Islam. I think it was over maybe 2 years, the entire series of Jadoo, which we did at absolute length. So there is a reality about that. But sometimes we are extremely, sometimes superstitious and overwhelmed by these things. So we need to be careful about that. Yes,
Or
Warren.
can I just come in here? We have a question. Assalamu alaikum. Maulana. How can one get children to read Salah in Quran, etc., without being authoritative?
Make sure you practice that yourself in home. The home environment is a beautiful environment wherein you develop that. And these are things that you develop from a young age. And therefore, the approach that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had, where in the home where salah is performed, all children generally imitate their parents. The love of that must be created. You need to explain why you're performing your salah, and that is by showing your children the bounties of Allah, explaining to the children the bounties of Allah that are provided to us. And for these bounties, you are actually bound to be grateful to Allah Ta'ala. And among the most beautiful way of being grateful to Allah Ta'ala is your salah, your worship. And the benefit of that salah is that Allah will grant you even more. These are some of the, academic discussions that we can have with our children in order to instill the love of Allah. And it is the love of Allah that will, insha'Allah, bring in them the good moral habit of performing the salah regularly, inshallah.
Well, another question that has come in. Assalamu alaikum. Maulana. I think grandparents also play a very important part in helping with upbringing of the children.
There's no doubt, absolutely no doubt. Although there are times, and I am saying that as I'm also a grandfather, sometimes we as grandparents do show a little more mercy, compassion, kindness to our grandchildren. But we also need to know that if you find your children who are disciplining their children, today in the modern cars, Morana, I use this example very regularly. You have that lane departure warning light. So as grandparents also, we need to stay in our lane. Sometimes when parents are disciplining their own children, we don't need to interfere, because end of the day, that child is going to grow up in the parent's home, not in our home. So there is that very fine balance and line that we need to maintain. Yes, if we find that your children are doing something to their children, which is not good, which is not correct, which is not prudent, not in the presence of the grandchildren, but later have an adult academic discussion about your approach. And many a times, many a grandparents try to undo what they did to their children. And in that also, there can be sometimes sensitive moments that can cause more damage than benefit.
Someone
Yes.
else asking,
Ji,
Assalamu
Mohammed.
alaikum. How do I, as a granny, encourage a 30-year-old to pray salah? I pray my salah, he sees me, and he has no father now.
Yeah, perhaps the correct approach was not used when the person is young. At this age, a person is an adult. The most that we can do is remind him of Salah. وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Continue reminding them, inshallah, and make dua. At this age, if a person is not regular with his Salah, there definitely was a major issue in his upbringing on the tarbiyah of him.
Well, today's sad state of parenting can be characterized as follows. Number one, overwhelming illiteracy amongst parents, which is an obstacle to seeking knowledge and learning skills. Number two, a culture of fear, which breeds a slave mentality devoid of creative initiative. Number three, a blind imitation of and obedience to others. That's a herd mentality. That's without critical analysis. And number four, a domineering and coercive approach at home and in the public domain.
Yes, Mohana, this are very deep things that you brought up. So it is widely perceived that the responsibility for solving the intellectual stagnation, which we are talking of, and the crisis of the mind that has almost paralyzed the Ummah, falls squarely on the shoulders of our seniors, our educators, and many a times the approach of our parenting. I'll repeat what I'm just saying, that the responsibility of solving the intellectual stagnation that we see in our ummah today, and the crisis of the mind that has almost paralyzed the ummah, these two issues falls squarely on the way and on the shoulders of our educators, our institutions, our homes, in the way we bring up children. And therefore, I honestly feel that when, Maulana, we were doing the program of narcissism and the type of questions that were coming from many, and that is the reason why I rightfully or wrongfully chose to discuss this topic of parenting in its detail, because many problems stem from the way that parents today unfortunately have outsourced the responsibility of parenting. Although both educators and parents have an important role to play, ultimately it is the parents that we should look for a solution in taking up this responsibility. Once convinced, inshallah, and we hope to achieve that objective from this program, we will certainly do their best, parents will certainly do their best to raise healthy, free, well-adjusted children, inshallah, capable of shouldering the mantle of leadership and bringing about a positive change in society. Ultimately, inshallah, reversing this paralysis that we see in our ummah, unfortunately. Parenting can make a break. Parenting can make or break a family. Parenting can make or break a society. Parenting can make or break a civilization. And building a civilization, building a child is a never-ending and is not a one-time job. I mean, the question that our lady asked about a 30-year-old child or a grown-up adult, how do we tell him to perform his salah? So parenting can make or break a family. It can make or break a society. And parenting is a never-ending and is not a one-time job. Rather, it is a way of life. It is a dynamic, continuous process. It's a powerful, dynamic, continuous process. It has a beginning. Parenting has a beginning, but it has no end. And as much as how old your child may be, or as how old you may be, you will always need the guidance of your parents. And no matter how old your child may be, your child may always need the guidance of yourselves. And civilizations, they continue to grow. Civilizations continue to improve. Civilizations continue to develop. And we see in our situations, we have a civilization today that is perhaps very different from a civilization 10 years ago. Perhaps 20 years ago, when we did not have the mobile phones. We did not have the mobile phones in our hands. So civilization has evolved from that to a total different challenge today. So in this challenge, sometimes even parents need guidance on adapting these new developments in society. But that's where we're talking about having these constructive discussions. It is a matter of a continuous exploration, a continuous discovery, and most important, a continuous improvement of our relationships with each other. And I put emphasis on this, Marana. A continuous improvement of our relationships with each other. And this is another meaning of ihsan. You know, when we talk about ihsan, ihsan is to aim for perfection, to continuously improve our approach, to continuously improve our relationship, and to think of the repercussions of our parenting practices on society at large. You know, we cannot just sit back and say, you know, we brought the children into this world. Now we just sit back and let society take control. When children are raised in a state of fear, which is unfortunately where parents are unable to manage the challenge, they instill fear. So when children are raised in a state of fear, when children are raised in a state of oppression, they become afraid to take risks. They become afraid to take decisions. And eventually they end up lacking a sense of responsibility and are unable to make decisions. Fearful children also adapt self-indulgent attitudes that leads to a lack of participation in public affairs. Maran, there was a question that came. I just want to go through it. I'm 31 with a condition called cerebral palsy, and I've been at home so long being a good daughter. Now when I'm trying to make my own decisions and coming out of my comfort zone, there's a tiff. Yeah, that's why I'm talking of there is continuous development in societies. There is continuous growing of challenges. And inshallah, in this program of ours, we are going to address many of these emerging challenges, inshallah. Yes, Maulana? So children brought up like in this authoritative ways will end up tolerating corruption. They will end up tolerating exploitation. They will end up tolerating bullying, and sometimes even shying away from performing their duties towards societies. Team spirit is lost in the process. Community responsibilities are neglected. And all of this that we are talking of prevents the establishment of institutions that are necessary for building our society. Unfortunately, these are things that we find there is a lack of. If you look at the examples, and that was one of the reasons we commenced with that, mothers of scholars, the golden age of Islamic civilization flourished because all these factors were kept in mind. You know, as much as how society has progressed, sophistication has progressed, but the basics of parenting was more found in the golden age of Islamic civilization. And we find in that era, all these factors were kept in mind while children were being raised, For example, the practice of breastfeeding was seen as an integral aspect of a child rearing, of child development, where proper attention was given to the child's necessary emotional and psychological development. You know, the wisdom of breastfeeding that develops the emotional and psychological development of a child is unparalleled. Indeed, the answer to the question, why did a great civilization decline to become the lowest of low, unfortunately, that we observe today? It lies in one important aspect, and I may be wrong, and please correct me if I'm wrong. It lies in one important aspect, and that is the way we raise our children, starting from birth. The lack of focus on good parenting is the key missing dimension of all those questions that you've asked us now, Maulana. The lack of focus on good, positive, wholesome parenting is the key missing dimension in the great and numerous reform efforts that we found in Muslim history. Now, just to conclude, Maulana, allow me to summarize just a few take-home points that I leave our listeners and viewers for consideration. The impact of various parenting styles that we spoke of. In an authoritarian parenting, children are obedient and proficient, but they rank lower in happiness, they rank lower in social competence, and they lack very low in self-esteem. I repeat, the impact of parenting styles, which I leave you with like a take-home message. An authoritarian parenting style, and we spoke about it, and we've defined it. Children may be obedient, children may be proficient, but they are very low as far as happiness. They are very low as far as social competence in communities and societies, and they are extremely low with regards to self-esteem. An authoritative parenting, children are happy, children are capable, and children are successful. So that's the approach. And we spoke about the various approaches of parenting in our last discussion. And then we also spoke of permissive parenting, where you just allow them to do whatever they want to. In this, children rank lower in happiness. They rank very low in self-regulating their approach and their habits, and are more likely to experience problems with authority and lower performance at school. So when a parent in home is like, just allow the children to do everything, there's no care, there's no catering, there's no guidance, there's no discipline. In that case, when that child goes to a school, that's the time when the child will find the problem, that the child will not be able to be regulated with laws in society and communities. And this type of children will experience problems with authority, and as a result will be low performers. And then you have the final one that we spoke of last week, Maulana, the uninvolved parenting. In this, where parents just don't take any interest in the growing of the child, and they perhaps leave it to nannies and outsource this. Children lack self-control, they have a very low self-esteem, and are less competent than their peers. So authoritative parents are both demanding and responsive, and they monitor and impart clear standards. And that's the type of parenting that we are suggesting. And just to conclude, what type of parenting does this include? You monitor and you impart clear standards for your children's conduct. You are assertive, but not intrusive or restrictive. Although you are assertive, you have your laws, you've drawn your lines, but you're not restrictive. And your disciplinary methods are not abusive, They're not oppressive, but they are rather supportive instead of being punitive. Your disciplinary methods are not punitive but supportive. The example I gave of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that was a disciplinary approach that was supportive instead of punitive. And an authoritative parent would want their children to be assertive as well as socially responsible and self-regulated as well as cooperative. And that's what you found in the incident that I gave of Rasulullah and the young boy. We find that that young man became assertive with regards to controlling his desires. And he became a socially responsible person. He said that never after that did I look at another woman with lust and desire. And he was also self-regulated. And as well, he was cooperative in building a society that is pure and wholesome. And that is what we are learning from this discussion, inshallah. Yes, Maulana, any final comments or questions before we conclude?
So, Maulana, we just have some quick ones. A lot of people asking for Maulana's contact details. I think we'll give Maulana's email.
I think I need to give a rider. I had a few people that contacted me last week also, that you can contact me if you want some advice. However, I do acknowledge that I'm not a professional counselor and I don't do counseling. For that, you need to go to some professional counselors, inshallah.
Inshallah. Also, yes, another comment that is coming. Sometimes you try to bring up balanced children, but they get married in homes that the spouse is not a balanced person. It becomes hard to bring up your own children in the way you were brought up. Yeah. Someone asking, does Maulana do counseling? We just mentioned, we know Maulana doesn't do counseling. So for a counseling, you have to go to a professional. But inshallah, we'll give Maulana's email out, and Maulana will try to, whoever contacts Maulana through email.
Wherever I can and wherever we can help. And also for our listeners, just to keep in mind, inshallah, that this is just the beginning of our discussion, and there are various aspects that we're going to cover, inshallah.
Inshallah. Ma jazakallah for the time, much appreciated. Inshallah, we'll speak again next week, Wednesday.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Have you ever been to the Ahsan store? It's filled with the most incredible items you would most certainly adore. What's more is that they deliver direct